Hello everyone, welcome to the Concept Hacks. So today we are going to discuss about different chambers of heart. Okay, so different chambers of heart. So different chambers of heart. So we know that we have four chambers, two atrium and two ventricles. Okay, so let's draw a basic diagram of human heart. So for example, this is the very typical diagram of human heart. So we know these two that I am currently drawing. This is the okay, let's draw first. So this one is called the right atrium. So this is the right atrium and this one is the left atrium. Just below the right atrium we have right ventricles, and just below the left atrium we have left ventricles. Okay, so let's discuss something interesting about right atrium one by one. Okay, so these two. So let's discuss something interesting about right atrium. Okay, first, if we go to detail about one by one each and every chambers, then we can basically it is said that the atrium is a singular. Atrium is a singular word. Singular, it is called the atrium. Singular, it is called the atrium, and if we go to the plural form, then it is called the atria and atrium. Is singular and atria is plural form. So these two atrium, right and left atrium, these are called basically, if we write something like right atrium and left atrium, they are basically the receivers. They are receivers of blood. These two are receivers. These two are receivers chambers. Receiver chambers of blood. Blood means deoxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood in case of right atrium, and oxygenated blood in case of left atrium. So but they will definitely receive those bloods from the outer environment. Now question may come that right ventricle and left ventricle also receive bloods, but they receive blood from the inside of two chambers of their heart. So right ventricle receive blood from right atrium, and left ventricle receive blood from left atrium, but this circulation is inside that heart only. But when both two atriums are receiving blood, but they are receiving from the external sources. Like in case of right atrium, from the superior vena cava and from the inferior vena cava, deoxygenated blood is coming in to the right atrium. Means from not inside the heart. Blood is coming from outside the heart. In case of left atrium also, they receive blood. It receives blood from through the pulmonary vein from the lungs. Okay, so in both the case, as both ventricle and atrium both receive bloods, but they are receiving some different sources. Atria receive bloods from external sources, but ventricles receive those bloods from internal sources. Internal sources means inside the heart. From one chamber to another chamber, heart is transporting. But when we are considering about the atrium, they are receiving blood from external sources. In case of right atrium, when I have written these things, that right atrium and left atrium both receive bloods. They are the receivers of blood. Receiver means they are receiver from external sources, from the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. They are receiving CO2 blood, carbon dioxygenated deoxygenated blood or carbon dioxide rich blood from the body. And when left atrium receive, they receive oxygenated blood from lungs. So here they receive blood from body and here they receive blood from lungs. So now these two, that's why they are called receiving chambers or receivers. And these left two ventricles, they are present inferiorly, and they are basically called that pumping chambers. Okay, so they are pumping chambers. So they are basically called pumping chambers, and both the atrium, they are called receivers or receiving chambers. So why both the ventricles called pumping chambers? The question arises because they pump blood from heart to external source. That's why they are called pumping chambers, because they pump blood from heart to external source. Okay, so how they will pump? As you know that there are two pipes are attached over there. One pipe is attached in the right ventricle and one pipe is attached at the left ventricle. That pipe or the blood vessel which is attached at the left ventricle, that is called the aorta, and that pipe or blood vessels which is attached at the right ventricle, this is called the pulmonary arteries. Okay, so we'll go detail about that when we'll discuss the right and left ventricle. Let's come to the main point over here, that one of the interesting thing that there is some kind of one word which is present, which is called the sulci, okay, or coronary sulcus. So what is that? So coronary sulcus, they are basically present on the external surface of the heart. Okay, so coronary sulcus, we know that sagittai and sulci, these two terms basically associated with the brain, but now that only sulci, that grooves like structure, basically they are present on the external surface of our heart. Okay, so what they'll do, basically their main function is that the main function of those sulci is that they basically comprises some kind of fatty materials and coronary blood vessels. Okay, so they basically comprises the coronary blood vessels plus some fatty material. Okay, so they basically comprises some kind of fatty materials and coronary blood vessels. So they are basically present at the external surface of our heart. External surface means they're basically present here. Suppose this is the cross section of our heart. It's very difficult to show you how it will look like. For example, suppose this is our heart. So this is our heart. So they are basically present. For example, this is the coronary artery, for example. So for example, this is the coronary artery. One coronary artery may be present over here, one will be present here, another will be here. So they will present. So these their coronary blood vessels, they are covered by some kind of groovy structures. Those are called the sulci. The coronary sulci is comprises those fatty materials. Basically, these blood vessels, coronary blood vessels, is covered by some kind of fatty materials. Those fatty materials along with that coronary blood vessels is called the coronary sulcus. Okay, so they are the present in the external surface of our heart. So next thing is we'll go detail over that chambers. The first we'll go to the right atrium. Now let's discuss about the right atrium. Right atrium. Okay, so let's draw the diagram again. First we'll draw the diagram of our heart. So as we're going to discuss about only right atrium, so I'll only draw the right atrium. Okay, so this is the right atrium. So right atrium basically receive blood from different blood vessels. Okay, so these are the two blood vessels I'm going to write here, which is called the superior vena cava and this is the inferior vena cava. And what is it? The green dot over here, this is the kind of sinus, which is the name of the sinus is coronary sinus. Okay, the superior vena cava, it will basically, we can divide it with the diaphragm. Okay, so that portion of our body, which is present above the diaphragm, blood from that part will be carried by our superior vena cava. Okay, which is present over our diaphragm. So this is the diaphragm, for example, and the portion of our body which is present below the diaphragm, and the deoxygenated blood will carry from that part by inferior vena cava. So the duty will be performed by superior vena cava of that body part which is present above the diaphragm, and the body part which is present lower that or below that diaphragm, that deoxygenated blood will carry by inferior vena cava. Okay, so just want to remember these things. And so if questions come, then inferior vena cava will carry blood from which part of our body. So your point of distinguish, we can distinguish clearly that the body part which is present above the diaphragm, that deoxygenated blood will carry by superior vena cava, and the body part which is present below that diaphragm and their deoxygenated blood will be carried by inferior vena cava. Okay, so what is the role of that sinuses? Okay, though coronary sinus basically it will carry blood or deoxygenated blood. It will carry the deoxygenated blood of heart muscle. It will carry the deoxygenated blood of heart muscle to the right atrium. Okay, so basically coronary sinus, this is the kind of hole, and this hole, through this hole, that coronary veins will attach with this hole, and from the coronary veins through that coronary sinus, the deoxygenated blood of our heart muscle will directly come to the right atrium, because heart is continuously performing the pumping action for the rest of our body parts. Okay, so who will provide the oxygen, and who will carry the deoxygenated blood of heart muscle? Okay, we know the coronary arteries from the aortic arch, one extra capillary or extra blood vessel will go and it will branch out toward the myocardium, and it will be considered as the coronary arteries. Okay, so the coronary arteries will supply the oxygenated blood to the all our heart. Okay, so from oxygenated blood, coronary veins will be attached, that those coronary veins will accumulated and they finally open through the coronary sinus to the right atrium. So through the coronary sinus, deoxygenated blood of our heart muscle will return to the right atrium. So this is the coronary sinus. So one more thing, what is the thickness of this right atrium one? So thickness is very less, it is 2 to 3 millimeter. So point to be remembered, this is the 2 to 3 millimeter in thickness. Okay, so another thing is the posterior and anterior wall of right atrium. So one thing we must know about this thing, that their posterior wall and the anterior wall, there is a little difference. Okay, there is a little difference in the structure of the posterior and anterior wall of right atrium, because the posterior wall, we know the posterior wall of the right atrium is quite smooth. Okay, it is a smooth one, but the anterior wall of right atrium, it's a rough one. It's not so smooth. Okay, so it is a right atrium posterior wall is smooth, but the anterior wall, it's rough. Why? Because there is a kind of pectinate muscles present at the anterior wall of our heart of right atrium, specifically right atrium. So the pectinate muscle which is present at the anterior surface, so it's the 2D diagram, I really cannot able to draw the things, that the anterior side of our right atrium, anterior wall of our right atrium, anterior wall of inside structure, I am currently talking about the internal structure. So internal wall of anterior side of right atrium, it's similarly rough is quite rough as compared to the posterior wall, because the anterior wall of our right atrium, it consists some kind of pectinate muscles. Okay, it's a kind of pectinate muscles, and because of the pectinate muscle, that anterior wall, inside linings of anterior wall of our right atrium is quite rough. Okay, so this is the thing. Another thing is the interatrial septum. So here is another thing, this is the another, so this is the left atrium, so this is the left atrium, and we have another kind of septum over here. So this septum is called the interatrial septum. Okay, so this is the interatrial septum. So this interatrial septum, it has a kind of very interesting some functions, that it separates both the atria. So it separates right atrium and left atrium. Okay, so if we go little deep anatomical structure of the both the septum, that particular septum, we can find that interatrial septum, there is a kind of depression over here. So septum is kind of like this. So this thing, the septum is quite depressive over here. So why it is? Because this is the septum, and the middle of the septum the middle of the septum is quite depressive because the presence of fossa fossa ovalis. Okay, so what is now fossa ovalis? So fossa ovalis, it's the remnant structure. It is a kind of remnant. It is a remnant structure of foramen ovale. So these two terms, now again these two terms will come. What is fossa ovalis and what is foramen ovale? Okay, so why this is only because of the presence of this fossa ovalis, this middle of our so this is interatrial septum. Okay, this is the interatrial septum, and because of the presence of fossa ovalis, this middle of our interatrial septum is quite depressive. Okay, so there is a depression present over here. So now thing is, when we are in the mother womb, in that time there both the septum, there is a hole in between both the septum. So when we are in mother womb, so this is the right atrium, this is the left atrium. So when we are present in the mother womb, during that time there is a hole which is used to present over here in between both the atrium. So blood basically automatically from right atrium it can go to the left atrium. There is a easy transfusion of blood from right atrium to left atrium in a fetus or in a embryo when we are in a mother womb. But just after our delivery or just after the birth, what will happen? That particular hole become closed and they leave with a small depression. When the hole become closed, the particular hole become closed, but now what will happen? That hole become closed after birth. So this is after birth, that particular hole it become closed, but it leave with some kind of depression. So this depression only because of that closing of that particular hole. So hole it will close. So now from right atrium blood cannot move towards the left atrium after birth. Okay, so this is the right atrium and this is the left atrium, and after closing of that hole, blood cannot move from right atrium to left atrium. Okay, that's why that hole become closed. But now when hole closed, it leave with some kind of remnant structure, and that particular remnant structure is called the fossa ovalis. Okay, so that particular structure when we are in mother womb, that particular structure is called that foramen ovale before birth. So let me write here. So before birth, and this is after birth. Okay, so before birth it is called the foramen ovale before birth, and after birth it is called the fossa ovalis. Okay, so when it is open before birth, during that time it is called, so when it is open before the birth, this right atrium, this left atrium. So when it is open before birth, that particular hole is called as foramen ovale. But when it get closed, that time it is called that fossa ovalis. So you can directly call that particular depression after birth, that particular depression is called as fossa ovalis, which is a remnant of foramen ovale. So don't get confused. So foramen ovale, it is the particular hole which is present, or it is used to present in a particular fetus or embryo when a particular fetus or embryo was present in his or her mother womb. But the particular fossa ovalis is called a particular kind of depression. The depression is called fossa ovalis, but here the particular hole is called foramen ovale. So depression, fossa ovalis, and particular hole, when this hole is continuously open, during that open position it is called foramen ovale. And when it closed after birth, that depression, it leave with a kind of depressive structure, that depression is called fossa ovalis. Now let's discuss about the atrioventricular valves. Okay, so this is the valve which is present in between right atrium and left ventricle. Right atrium and right ventricle. So this right atrium and right ventricle, in between them there is a valve present, because when blood comes from all over body, through the superior vena cava and through the inferior vena cava to the right atrium, it become constrict and the blood will directly come to the right ventricle. Okay, so through that tricuspid valve. Okay, so through the tricuspid valve or interatrioventricular valve. Okay, so this is called the right atrioventricular valve. So this is called right, as it is a right atrium and right ventricle, that's why it is called the right atrioventricular valve or tricuspid valve. Right atrioventricular valve or tricuspid valve. Okay, so this is called the atrioventricular valve, but this is a one-way valve. Why one way? Because when blood comes from right atrium, that when the blood comes through that particular tricuspid valve from right atrium to right ventricle, it will only able to come in this direction, in downward direction, but it cannot go to the upward direction. Once from the right atrium, the blood, it will come through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle, it is easily it can come, but from the right ventricle the blood cannot move back through the tricuspid valve to the right atrium, because this is a one-way valve. It only allows the blood from right atrium to right ventricle, but it will never allow the blood to come from right ventricle to right atrium. Okay, this is the another thing. But one more thing we need to know about that, this valve is also lined with endocardium. So this is the valve. For example, I am writing here, I am drawing this basic typical diagram. So that lining, the internal linings of that valve is also covered with the endocardium. So this is the endocardium. So this is the small thing we need to know about that different chambers of heart. Now in this video we have covered the right atrium in detail, what are the different what is the thickness, from where it can receive those bloods, like superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and coronary sinus. This is the coronary sinus. We know what is depression which is present over here, which is called the fossa ovalis, and it's the remnant structure of foramen ovale. And what is the left atrium, which is interatrial septum, we also know that. And at last we have discussed something little about tricuspid valve, their internal linings, why it is tricuspid. Because one more thing we need to know, why it is called tricuspid. Tri means three, okay, tri means three. So three cup like structure. This is the cup number 1, this is cup number 2, and cup number 3. Okay, as it is three different cups are attached, that's why it is called the three different cups, small three different cups are attached, that's why it is called the tricuspid. So tri means three, cuspid means, you can say, it's the point. Okay, so 3 point or 3 cup, they are associated combinedly, so that's why it is called the tricuspid. Okay, so in the next video we'll discuss about the other different chambers like right ventricle, left ventricle, and left atrium. Okay, see you in the next video. Thank you everyone, thank you so much.